Okay, so what I want to do is talk about same-sex parenting this afternoon, and I want to start, the two questions I want to look at is what are the unique issues faced by same-sex parents, and what are the same and different issues for same-sex parents and straight parents. So I want to start with this. So my kids have been a member of Collage, the Children of Lesbians and Gays Everywhere, which is actually currently inclusive for bisexuals and transgender people too, but I think it would have made a really weird acronym, so they've kept Collage. And he was down at an event in New York City. We live about 2.5 hours north of New York City. I guess he was about 14 or 15. And kids being kids these days, part of what they did is they had a kind of Twitter discussion about their event as it was happening. And I loved this one, so I don't know this girl, Claire Knight, but this was what she sent out on Twitter during this conference. It says, "The director of the sperm bank nods. The women can become mothers. So it begins." I always get choked up from this. So it begins, this gift, my life. So that's the voice of the children. You know, that's the voice of, the sort of, those of us from another generation before LGBT parenting, what will it be like for the children and what will they think having a father who's a sperm donor? That's one story about what they think. Of course, as we discussed earlier, there are many stories, but that's one story. So there are, I'm going to say, at least 3 million US same-sex households, and the figure about how many kids are being raised in gay and lesbian homes, and I don't think anyone's doing research on bi and trans homes. And again, I think these statistics are conservative because you need people who are willing to say, this is a gay home, this is a lesbian home, to somebody who's doing research and statistics. And I think lots and lots and lots of people don't want to do that. You know, we have a joke in my family which goes like this: I don't like my name on lists, I'm a Jew. And you know, I think that a lot of people in these demographics are not necessarily signing up when the questions are being asked. It's great that the questions are being asked though. So the first thing I just want to start with is that gay people have always raised children. There's really nothing new about that. What's new is that we're doing it out of the closet and we're doing it with pride. So there's always been gay people who have had kids and their kids have been in public school systems, but the message was shh. And actually many years ago when I lived in the Bay Area, 1979, 1980, I knew a young woman in her 20s. I was in my 20s, she was in her 20s, and she was actually raised by lesbian parents. But she did not know that her mom was a lesbian until she came out as a lesbian when she was about 19 years old. And her mom and her mom's really good friend that had always been part of the family, and it was sort of one of those, oh my God, like I never made the connection, but they had really been closeted in raising her, even though she identified them as mom and aunt. There's a huge increase in LGBT people seeking parenthood, okay, what's been referred to as the baby boom. So again, back in 1980, when I was living in the Bay Area, I worked at the Berkeley Women's Health Collective. In the days when we first started receiving those phone calls, I'm a lesbian and I want to have a child, and there was 1 or 2 sperm banks at the time that were willing to work with lesbians who were doing that. So following that, that generation of kids is pushing 30 now. Okay, so I mean that's a perspective. So that we now have at least 2 generations of kids that have been raised in more or less out homes, and how out those homes are has changed over time, and also demographics in terms of what part of the country people are living in. So LGBT parenting rarely happens by accident. Now there are exceptions to that. There are bisexuals who have sex. There is the occasional lesbian having sex with a man that produces an unexpected pregnancy. There's the occasional sort of sad stories where a gay man inherits his sister's 4 children because her and her husband were killed in a car accident that no one really ever thought was going to really happen when he signed the paper saying, of course I'll take care of your kids, but here he's a parent. So there's other ways of it happening, but by and large, this is really the first generation of gay and lesbian parents who have really planned to have children, and the planning process is really exhausting. I mean, however you're planning on doing it, it's exhausting. So I guess that's one thing I want to sort of tag for us all, is that oftentimes doctors, gynecologists, therapists, social workers, when the client says, I want to have a child, or I'm planning on having a child, the therapist is not hearing that as the client saying, can you help me figure out how to do this? So it's almost like the assumption is, and you know what the next step is, and they're not always sure who to call, and they're certainly not sure of where's the best place to go, or which is the best doctor in town to work with. They don't have those resources. So to really think about that as resources. Okay, true story, Albany, New York. True story, swear to God I didn't make this up. Okay, gynecology visit, 1985, probably 86, something like that, maybe 87. Sitting there with the assistant, asking all the questions. Why are you here? Well, I want to get pregnant, and I want to talk to the doctor about helping me get pregnant. I'm single and I'm a lesbian. So clipboard in hand. Wait a minute. Puts it down and walks out of the room. Okay, that's bad. That's not good. So I'm sitting there a long time. The door opens up, and the doctor, so that's to prove the point that not all women doctors are great, opens the door and goes, what exactly is going on in here? So I don't know what that other person told her, but I share that story with you because, I'm pretty well put together. I know what I'm doing. That's not going to deter me. All that said to me is, oh my God. You have to understand, I had moved from California, and I was sort of and it was like, oh my God, there was so much work to be done. But you can really appreciate how this could be incredibly intimidating. And I have to say that the doctor I was at was because that practice didn't hang up on me. Because the 3 other practices, one of the people hung up on me when I asked the question, would you work with a lesbian trying to get pregnant? And the doctor I ended up working with, the sweetheart, said, and I said, I've had a little trouble finding a doctor, and he was like, why? I said, because I'm a single lesbian, and he was like, so? And I was like, okay, let's get to work now, let's talk about this. But I share that with you because it's really ugly out there sometimes, and people are really, really, really vulnerable. Okay, so LGBT, I'm sticking in the queue now. Yes?
Was that the Pap smear doctor? Same doctor?
No, different doctor. Different doctor, 20 years apart. The Pap smear doctor was probably in medical school while that drama was taking place. We're going to cut that part out, right? Pap smear doctor. So there have always been LGBTQ people, there have always been families, but what there has never been is a time in history when so many self-identified, same-sex, queer-gendered people are having children, rearing children, and living in family units where they're out and proud. There is an email list that I'm on called Trans and Gender Queer Parenting. And I've been on the list for at least a decade. So it's been around for at least a decade. So the whole sort of Oprah thing about, the pregnant guy. You all remember the pregnant guy. You all don't remember the pregnant guy. Oprah did this show, I lose track of times, 5 years ago or so, where it was like, the first ever pregnant man. I think that's right. Yeah. And then it was a whole big thing. It was a trans guy who got pregnant. He actually had 2 children. And it was sort of, billed as, I don't know, in somewhat of a circus kind of way, but the first time it ever happened. I knew children that were, at the time that was filmed, 16 years old, that were from similar situations. So, it may have been new to Oprah, it may have been new to America, but it wasn't all that new. So it's a vanguard of pioneers, and they're pioneers in a very hostile territory. family. So, we've talked about the microaggressions, we've talked about the legal issues, but the issue for most same-sex parents, and certainly for trans parents, is that the ability to legally secure children in queer families is very, very compromised. And families are often in the position where they are the first. The first family in the daycare, the first family in the elementary school. And again, this is changing as there are more and more and more families, but that dynamic across the country is being replayed out every single day. And again, in talking to people, when we sat down at one of the schools that we brought my kid to, whenever that was, 13, 14 years ago, and we're interviewing all these different schools, and I said, so, we're lesbian moms, we're a Jewish family, my son is adopted and African American, and we just want to know, what your sensitivity is and how you're going to be with this. And this was one of the responses was, we have a lot of books in the library on that. And it was like, really? Because I don't think there's any books on that. I mean, I don't think there's a kids book in America on that subject. And there probably is now, but there wasn't then. And that was just really, we were like, thank you very much. And the school that we ended up going to was the school who said, well, that's a big learning curve. There's obviously a lot of pieces here. We have a lot of learning to do, but let's do that together. Let's meet your kid. And we moved on from there. So, and I think that piece, but that takes a lot. So, same school, the head of the school comes to me, and my kid is much older at this point, and says, we have a lot of, she probably said, gay families that are visiting the school, but they're not sticking. And I don't know why. And I said, well, are you talking with them about this? What's the conversation you're having? And she says, well, they're not bringing it up. And I'm not saying anything, but there's two women sitting there with their kid. There's two men sitting there with their kid. And I said, well, why don't you try saying, I just want you to know there are other same-sex families here at the school if you'd be interested in talking to them. And she was armed now, so she was really all excited. And she's actually funny because she's a very flat person, not a lot of smiles. And I saw her about 3 weeks later. She ran up to me and she said, I tried that. And she said their faces beamed. So, yes, there's a risk that the two women sitting there are going to say, oh no, I'm her sister. Okay, I'm sorry. It was a misunderstanding. Sorry. Not a huge deal. But the assumption that the couple has the skills to say these words is, we can't assume that the people may not know themselves. Now, there are people that are fierce advocates and they absolutely know how to do that, but there are lots of people that don't know how to do that.
Well, I think it's part of the hostility that you're talking about that is pervasive. And so when you name these things, you take the hostility away in someone. You say, we're aware of this.
Right.
We want you to know it.
Right, exactly.
You're conscious.
Yeah. So, there's this sort of goldfish bowl experience, the sort of pressure to be the perfect family. So there you are, the very first gay couple, and you happen to have a kid who is, ADHD and climbing the walls and being really difficult in the school. And how is that being perceived, and who is perceiving that? Well, that's obviously, the kid is acting that way because he doesn't have a mom. And that's why the kid is acting that way. And those assumptions are really there. There was a story a friend of mine told that she got a call from the school that they were worried about her son because he kept repeating, and I'm not going to get the line perfectly, but he kept repeating, you are not my father. And they were worried about, what this had to do with his psychological development. And anybody get it here? Mom said he's been watching a lot of Star Wars. That's what it's about. It has nothing to do with his development or his missing a father or anything like that. But there's sort of this interpretation that kind of goes on out in the world. Okay, so where do yes?
Can I just add one hostile point?
Yes, you can.
I feel that same-sex parents get the second-class parent perception. It's just like, well, not quite as good as a guy and a girl parent, but
yes,
but okay. And you got married, so it's okay. That's
okay.
better
That's
than
right.
not married. Really, I think it's really pervasive. Like, oh, it's two women. How are you going to raise this boy? you have no idea what boys are, you know, it's really like a second-class status.
As if women don't raise boys all the time.
Right,
Yes.
yeah, exactly, or there weren't these, there's not something missing from a heterosexual parent situation.
So, and we're going to talk about that, this sort of gendered dynamic of you need one of each or else, and how that kind of comes out of our profession and kind of trickles down into, you know, people who never are thinking, I'm a Freudian at all, or like espousing this whole sort of Freudian ideology around parenting. So that's definitely that. And when kids are adopted, there's a double piece around there, because you're really not their parents, you're just kind of taking care of them. Like, how nice of you to take care of these kids, you know, you get couple. I mean, and there's really like a sense of that. So yeah, okay. So where do LGBT families live? So same-sex couples live in virtually all counties in the U.S., and 96% of the counties in the U.S. have same-sex couples raising children. So that may surprise some of you here. This is not like a San Francisco project, okay? And actually what we know is, although these large cities, New York, LA, and San Francisco, have the highest concentration of same-sex couples, actually, if you look at the map, I don't know how well you can see that these states here are the highest fraction of couples raising children. And there's, I know that everyone has the same reaction to that. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. Williams Institute. Well, but I mean, even, you know, if you don't mind, you know, they can't move away. They don't want to move away. That's their home. There are actually people that want to live in Texas. There are actually people that want to live in Alabama, and they call that their home, and they like living there, and that's where they want to make their lives and their families. I know it's shocking, but it is true. It's such a California reaction.
So wait, sorry, you're talking fraction, meaning the percentage?
The percentage of families living there. But if you look at all of the parents,
state.
Yeah, in the whole state, that's right.
Could you repeat what that meant? I missed some fraction.
I knew we were going to get this stuff. Yes.
Could you read the states?
Say that again?
Could you read off the states?
I can read off the states: Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona,
Arkansas.
What did I say?
Arizona.
Oh, I didn't mean to say that at all. Sorry about that. Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina.
Can you do their Catholic?
And I believe that, no, I can't do that. But I am studying that with my son, so I should be able to do it. And I don't have the statistic here, but I believe it was the city of Detroit had the highest number, higher than San Francisco and you know, the places you would think. So it's really important to understand that there are families everywhere. Everywhere. This is not just a big city phenomenon.
What did the highest fraction mean?
It means that out of all the, remember, not as many people live in Montana.
Right.
Okay, right? So if you take all of the families there, it's a larger chunk. So lots of families live in New York City, so there's more gay and lesbian families there, but they're a smaller percentage chunk of it. Okay? Yes, it is. So some of the myths, the sort of myth of gay men as child molesters, and I want you to think about how that functions for gay dads. So, you know, many people, I shouldn't say most, many people today, you know, you have a new baby and the baby sleeps in bed with you. Well, when the gay dads say, well, the baby's sleeping in bed with us. Really? I mean, somehow that's different than the baby sleeping in bed with mom and dad, or even mom and mom. But, you know, those gay men just can't help having sex like all the time anyway. I mean, there's a lot of fear around that. So, you know, even if, you know, we don't buy into any of that stuff, I mean, you know, we know better, it's still hard for the dads they don't know who's going to react or how people are going to respond to that, or how Child Protective Services is going to respond to that information, or how the adoption agency, you know, when they keep coming around and poking around and checking on you for the next year, how they're going to respond to it. So this is the piece you were talking about, the need for two opposite sex parents, that children need a mommy. That if you don't have a mommy, I mean, what are two men going to do? I mean, everybody knows you need a mommy to raise a child. And the thing with daddies are a little more complicated. It's really not that you don't really need them in the same kind of way, but children are healthier when you have daddies in the home. And it's an interesting sort of side note, but a lot of adoption specialists find that there are lots of pregnant women seeking a home for their child that they want to place for adoption that seek out two mommy homes. Because two mommy homes are homes where the children are not going to get molested. I mean, that's their belief structure. Interesting sort of reverse kind of odd discrimination there. And the fear is that children will become gay or worse, and I'll leave you to your own imaginations about what that meant. I'm sorry?
Oh, yeah, I can't think, you know, what does worse mean and how does that on a continuum with the gay? You know?
Well, right, no, well, who knows, but that's sort of the sense is that what is going to happen to these children. You know, God knows what they're going to be like. What was the latest thing that just went on with the debate? I didn't actually see it because I was actually busy parenting.
The
literally.
47s?
No, not the 47s. It was that
Binders of women?
The binders of...
Yeah. In the same talk about the binders of women, there was some comment about children needing a mommy and daddy.
Oh, the mothers, you have to go home.
Oh, yeah. He
Yeah,
said,
no, there was that line.
he said two-parent household, and then I think he did say mommy and daddy.
Right, and then there was some inference about, you know, buying guns or like, you know, some kind of school violence. And, you know, a friend of mine like posted the next day on Facebook, you know, like, if anyone's looking for me, I'm very busy today because me and the children are going out to buy guns because that's like all we have to do. But somehow this inference, I mean, of course, you know, the shooting incidents in the school, as far as I know, were two-parent heterosexual families. But somehow, I mean, this whole thing gets sort of translated. I'm not going to get into
Mommy's
it.
son wanted to punch the president.
Yes, I did see that. Yes.
Was there any comparison with a single divorced father sleeping in the bed with a young child?
Well, I don't know.
Let's look down too.
I'm sure that, I mean, you know, I mean, this is part of the men are dangerous piece.
Yeah.
So certainly around children. So LGBT families are, this is all the new research coming out from the Williams Institute, and it's really solid. They do very good work. LGBT families, and I probably should say LG families, not LGBT, are more likely to be poor, especially families of color. Same-sex couples raising children are more racially and ethnically diverse, both in terms of the fact, and I'm actually finally glad this is one of those issues, I'm glad somebody has the research, because I have been suspecting this for years and saying, I don't have numbers, but I believe that there are more interracial coupling relationships in the lesbian and gay community, and also because of the issue of transracial adoption. So families are more likely to be mixed-race families. Same-sex couples of color are more likely to raise children than white same-sex couples. So even though the research that we have is primarily on white lesbians, they are not the primary group raising children, which doesn't surprise me on a whole bunch of levels. It just doesn't surprise me. I mean, children being what they are in families of color, of course, lesbians are going to be raising children in higher numbers. I mean, it just makes logical sense to me. But again, we have the numbers now. LGBT families are more likely to be binational, and nearly half are rearing children. That surprised me. That surprised me. Lastly, 57% of gay men and 70% of bisexual men say they want to have children. So even though, as you'll see, the numbers that we have are primarily about lesbian couples, the gay boom is very much coming into the gay male community, and as adoption agencies open up their doors, gay men are absolutely showing up to have children. And oftentimes having, we're going to talk in a minute about the different ways people make families, but lots of gay male couples that I know have adopted, I keep blocking out the term I want, family groups. So they went from being not dads to having a 16, 13, 9, 7, and 2-year-old like overnight. So you know, there's a whole, somebody looking to do a piece of research. There's some really good research to be done. There's a thing, if we can search it over the break real quickly, and you can probably look it up on your phones there. There's a family that's been getting a lot of press on the internet who adopted 12 children, and there's this very cute discussion there where the dads are sitting there and he's going 14, 13, 11, 9. and the other one goes, 14, 13, 11, 9, 16, and he's like, got it, like right down, like the ages of all these kids. So, and he was showing you his Google Calendar and how he has everything mapped out from, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it's no joke, getting, that's a 4-hour project, getting everybody out of the house to school, so. So diverse groups of children. We're looking at children of divorced heterosexual partnerships. What used to be the primary group of families and remains a large group of families, because even though there are out gay people choosing families, there will always be heterosexual couples divorcing where somebody is coming out. That's not a statement about heterosexuality. It's just a statement about life. So that was supposed to be a joke. Didn't work. It's not a statement about heterosexual couples breaking up and people becoming gay. It is just a statement that this will happen. So we can assume that that dynamic and those issues, the kind of issues that those kids are struggling with in terms of, growing up in a home that's always been gay is a very different dynamic than having your mom tell you she's gay when you're 14. So those issues will always be with us. Children of divorced same-sex partnership, and as we'll see, the divorce rate does not seem to be all that different for gay people than straight people. So, there are kids that potentially have 4 moms or 6 moms, which is, again, that's a really interesting demographic of what that means for kids to be growing up. There's an article you can search online of a guy who, and his whole thing is, I'm okay, sort of, and I'm all right, but the product of a lesbian couple, and his parents broke up, and each of them recoupled, and he talks about what it was like having, 4 moms in high school, like, 4 like over-involved crazy moms going to PTA and all of this dynamic. And he said the way he used to piss his moms off is all he used to do was listen to Rush Limbaugh. Because that the only way to sort of get any traction in his family was, Republican stuff. So children from out LGBT homes, children in families formed by remarriage and step-parenting, again, gay or straight, children in families formed by adoption at birth, a very different dynamic than children in families formed by adoption as older children. And I want to be really clear that one can have all of these in one family. I mean, one can, be heterosexually divorcing, having a lesbian partner, that now you're in a step family that's a lesbian family. Now you and your partner decide to adopt a child. I mean, so it's not like there's only one dynamic happening there. Children in families formed by donor insemination, and for the record, donor insemination, not artificial insemination. Okay, because there's nothing artificial about it. It's donor insemination. Children in families formed by surrogacy. And, that was it, okay. So how do queer people get babies? So I didn't originally have this in here, but sometimes when I'm done talking, people want to talk about the sort of hows, like how do people get pregnant? So if you have any questions you want to ask about that, this would be the time to do that. So lesbians can use donor sperm, either known or unknown. So what I mean by that is some people use a friend, and that could either be, getting pregnant, as long as you don't have any fertility problems, is really not like a big deal. Guy jerks off in cup, as long as it stays warm for an hour or two, under the arm, you carry it over to the house. So, I have friends that the donor is somewhat known, meaning that you have a friend. Now, I don't know your friend, but I know you, and you know your friend, and you're saying, I don't want to know him because I don't want to get into a legal thing with him. I don't want to do that. But you're saying he's a good guy. It's okay. He's not going to come after you. So you do your thing. You bring it to me. I give it to my wife. She gets pregnant. We move on. And then it becomes, if the kid is older and says I want to meet them, it's easy. I say, well, let's give Keith a call, and So you can sort of set that up, or you can use a donor bank. And more, the banks have an option which allows the kids, not the parents, but the kids to find the donor at age 18. And there's a wild thing that this movie was so wild. Is that a little birdie?
Yeah.
A blue jay. My partner would have known that, Thank you for telling me that was Uncle Jay. That made me very happy. It's okay. I don't mind the audio. Yeah, I think it's distracting the audio. It's a filming of this, donor number 96325, and they have a thing now called the donor registry. So parents can register, saying, I had a child from donor 36925, and when the idea is when the kids are 18, they can track down their donor. But what's starting to happen, because of the internet, and kids are savvy, is the kids are getting on it and they're finding one another. So now there is this I think that's what it's called, the donor sibling registry. So there's all these kids, and this one donor had, I don't know, like 300.
Right.
So it's not all 300, but it's about 12 kids from all over the country who sort of got together and went to meet him. And he's kind of a character. He kind of lives in a van. He's kind of a character. So, and it's sort of their reactions to sort of dealing with what does this mean, and the family's reactions, because some of them were for it and some of them were against it, and some of them, so there's a whole bunch of different dynamics that are going on right now for this generation of kids. And the question of whether or not these kids are siblings, and I think it mirrors a lot of the conversations in our culture about adoption. I have 2 adopted children whose families we know, and are those kids, they're clearly biological siblings, but are they siblings? And should they be or shouldn't they be? Or, we kind of view them almost more like cousins. And there are people who are non-biological who we view as cousins because they're part of our extended family. So I think how these kids are going to be making sense of all of this, I think, is fascinating. And there's also a whole bunch of kids who are using families are using unknown donors. So they will never have access to that. So I think that the one piece that I think is really important here in terms of family therapy is understanding that every family will have a different language and way of talking about this, and to engage families in that. If you are referring to the donor as the father, you're sending a message about fathers and families, versus if you're referring to the donor as a donor. And I'm not saying which one you should do or which one you shouldn't do, but I'm saying you need to be conscious that if you keep saying your daddy, I think that kid is going to have a lot more interest in knowing more about the daddy than if you're talking about it as a donor. People have donor livers in this culture. You don't necessarily want to go meet the person who donated. It's a very different conceptual piece that we have
Or feel
around.
more disqualified.
Say it again?
Or feel more disqualified. The child might have more interest in meeting the daddy, or they might feel more disqualified that the person that's talking to them doesn't get it.
That's a good point. So, and that's a hard piece of sort of following the child's lead. I sometimes think we've made a little mistake in the adoption community as we've moved. As we've moved from severing those connections, and now we move to an open adoption, and now we've moved to connecting kids, which I'm all about. But there's a way that I see in some families that we do that almost minimizes this family. Like, we're going to do everything we can to keep you in touch with your biological family. It's really your real family. And that's not the words that are used, but that's sort of the vibe that's given. So I think there's a balance there between acknowledging and talking about it and being open. But like adoption, there are kids that couldn't care less and kids that care a lot less. They care a lot about it. Okay. I thought that was a hint.
I think there was also a rationale about registering people about sperm fathers, donor fathers.
Yeah.
Because there were so many half-siblings, essentially, that they can have romances and have children, which would be pretty lousy.
That's the
Fear.
That's the fear. How real it is unknown.
Right.
And the truth is, the fears that we have around 2 half-siblings having all kinds of genetic problems is way exaggerated. What's a problem is when you're doing it for 4 generations in a row. That's when it gets a little complicated. And I also would think that would come out in the context. If a woman is dating a man, and both of you know that you were from an unknown donor, I would think at that point, before you had children, you may say, Mom, what number was my donor? It just seems like it's not that complicated to do. I think the reasons for that have been a little more complicated, I think. So having sex with a man, some people actually have some lesbians actually get pregnant by simply having sex with a man. Adoption, and more adoption agencies are open. About 60% of adoption agencies nationally now will adopt to lesbian and gay couples, and in places like where I live in Albany, they seek out gay and lesbian couples, and I know in San Francisco, there's actually been a push to seek out transgender people as potential adopters. It's the only place that I know of where that is happening. Is that a hand, Michelle? No. Okay, and step parenting, and I think the whole process of falling in love with someone that already has children and developing families that way. Okay, and foster parenting. You know, it's interesting internationally looking at that because in like Australia, they don't have a system of sort of permanency adoption the way we do here. So when you sort of foster adopt, it's kind of for the long haul. But they don't actually sever rights in the same kind of way. And there's sort of pros and cons. And you know, adoption is, I could do a whole 3 days on adoption. So there's a whole bunch of, you know, things to look at in terms of that. Oh, and yes. And then there's that. Then there's infertility treatments and IVF, and that picture exhausts me every time I see it. It just exhausts me. So gay men can adopt and are doing so in increasing numbers, but gay men can also use surrogacy. And surrogacy is, first of all, very expensive. It's not allowed in every state. It's not actually not allowed in New York State, although people do, but it's not. There's complicated laws around it. So when gay men or men are using surrogacy, there's two levels of it. There's a gestational surrogate, and there's also the donor egg surrogate, which can or cannot be the same person. Okay, so if you want to really separate it out, you would use the donor egg from a woman, and it would, with one person's semen, or it kind of gets interesting, both, so then you don't actually know which one is the biological dad, and into it.
That's pretty clear.
And that one's clear, yes. I think that was supposed to be the picture for adoption, but yes. But don't say that, because you never know. There's, I mean, there are couples who have twins that are, you know, yes, it's a complicated piece how that gets passed along. I do know a couple who had used the donor eggs from one woman.
2 eggs.
2 eggs. With one sperm and the other one sperm, and fertilize the 2 eggs and put them into a gestational surrogate, and have twins that are half siblings biologically. That's a whole other. The question was, why doesn't the body reject it? I don't know. But these 2 kids are definitely walking around right now.
The body won't reject it.
Yeah, the body doesn't know.
If a woman has sex with 2 men around a certain time, you can
Yes, you
get
can.
pregnant by 2 men.
Yes, you can.
You could have a surrogate up for that.
The one that's carrying them has no physiological, I don't know.
Yeah. So I say this to you to say that people are very creative in making families these days. What was that? What was that?
He said, why doesn't the body reject? I said, because women are amazing.
Because women are absolutely. And then there also are families where the fathers stay in touch with the surrogate. So she becomes sort of, again, an extended part of the family. There's a wonderful movie called Daddy and Papa that I encourage you all to watch, that is fascinating, not only because of the gay dad thing and the adoption thing, but is also in terms of race and cultural identity, and the African-American child who was being fostered by an African-American family in the extended community and the church community, and then these 2 white dads. Actually, one of them is not a white dad, but they come in to adopt the child, and there's all this sort of like, we're not letting these gay people adopt this child, and there's a whole like drama going on, and you know, it's sort of it's kumbaya by the end of it, but it's very sweet how they sort of work out these dynamics. And there's a great line where one of the dads says, "I knew we were adopting a child. I didn't know that we were adopting an entire African-American church." And that's really what happens. I mean, that they really become extended family to one another. And it's wonderful. Daddy and Papa. It's a true story. Okay, so let me move on from here. So trans people can become parents too. That is Della Grace there on your right, who is a photographer. So if they have wombs, they can use them. okay? For trans men, they would have to stop taking testosterone. Nobody's done a lot of research on this, like how many years can you be on testosterone before like the parts don't work, but because eggs are stored, presumably you stop taking testosterone. I mean, I obviously have to take estrogen. As you can imagine, most trans men don't want to do that. So it's a complicated, I mean, like fertility drugs for women, I mean, it's really unpleasant.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when they change the genitals, they usually leave the internal?
That's a complicated question I'm going to ask you to hold for tomorrow, but most trans men, many trans men don't change their external genitalia. Some trans men will have a hysterectomy. So obviously the point is you can't have a hysterectomy and then get pregnant. So that's why if you have a womb, you can get pregnant.
Cool.
If you still have those parts. If they have working sperm, which at some point of taking estrogen, you won't have working sperm. Or if you store sperm. So lots of people have done that. And probably the most well-known, and Oprah did a thing about this too, is Christine McGinn, who is a transgender woman and a surgeon, stored her sperm. This is one of those places where language becomes baffling. She stored her sperm and years later used her sperm to impregnate her lesbian partner. And they have adorable twins.
You have to go to puberty to be able to do that.
You have to go.
Through puberty, you have to.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was going to save that piece for tomorrow, but I'll add it in today. You have to have gone through the biological puberty, which now that we're transitioning children younger, there are children who won't go through that. So that eliminates the ability to get pregnant, which is one of the recommendations in the new standards of care, is that you always talk to people about pregnancy and fertility, although you try having that conversation with a 12-year-old. Seriously, I just want you to know that this means that you won't be able to get pregnant.
But hormone blockers won't do that. Like
hormone blockers will not.
And
do
that's
that.
what they start doing.
Right. So if you start on hormone blockers, when you stop taking the hormone blockers, you would go into your normative puberty for that body type. But many people who take hormone blockers, I know this is really confusing. We're going to cut all this out of here, okay? Sean, we're going to cut all this out of here. It just doesn't belong in here. That doesn't belong anywhere. It just doesn't belong in this section. So then if you would start taking cross-gender hormones, so you would actually never go into female puberty or male puberty in the biological sex. Did that make sense to everybody? Okay. I feel like I just did like my PhD dissertation there. Okay. 38% of trans people who transition between 25 and 44 identify as parents. Okay. And 82% of those who transitioned after age 55 identify as parents. So again, I think this is a hugely untreated population. This is a conversation that we're not having enough of in the trans community. Remember I said yesterday that I think the strength of my book is that it's a family-centered book, and people are not, that's not how it's seen, that these are the issues we need to be talking with trans people about more. Okay.
I'll just add to that often the name also is really important to them. I work with an FTM who was really very committed to being referred to as mother. Mm-hmm. And that was a very important identity to him.
Absolutely.
And it would have been very validating for me to then have issue with the fact that he was a mother and that that was an important identity.
And there are absolutely sort of odd moments with that, this sort of bearded guy walking through the supermarket with the kid going, "Mommy!" But, oh well, Dell's kid refers to him as Mapa. And we'll talk more about all this tomorrow, I promise. Okay, so developing families outside of the cultural expectation. Which one is the real mother? You can't have two dads. Well, I do. Well, you can't. Well, I do. Well, you can't. Many of our families are unique looking, so we stand out, causing other people to notice us and the relationship, the sort of goldfish bowl. The quasi-legal status of many non-biological parents or the partner of the adopting parent, because in many states you can't adopt as two moms or two dads, so one parent is doing the adopting, so the other parent is never a legal parent. which is really scary. It's really scary when the biological parent, parents are opposed to the whole gay thing, and it means that if something were to happen to that mother or that father, that the children would not simply go to the other parent, they would go to the closest biological relative. So it's very frightening.
Wasn't there recently a case where a judge gave parental rights to 3 people?
I read about that. I don't know the details of that. That was groundbreaking, though.
Yeah, it was
And-
very recent.
Right, and that's the other piece with known donors or fathers, is that until they relinquish their rights, the other mother can't have rights. So that's very complicated on many levels, especially if it's an active father in the family, that there's no way to allow the second mom to be a parent because there already is 2 parents. Yes.
Quick question. You said that in several states or many states you cannot adopt if your parents are the same sex.
Right.
Don't those coincide with the ones on that map that you showed, where there's greater percentage? To me, in my
Right.
mind, those would
They
be
can't
the states.
adopt, right, they can't adopt as a couple. But in most states, there's only 2 that I know of that you can't. That if you are gay, you can't adopt. In every other state, as long as you're kind of closeted, you can adopt, but your partner can never become a legal
Right.
parent.
So those are some of the implications.
Yes,
But
right.
then a lot of those families that we're talking about
Absolutely.
have to be closeted.
Extremely vulnerable,
Right.
extremely vulnerable. And if there's a dad involved, you know, who might be not about their ex-wife being a lesbian, it could get really, really, really ugly.
I mean, to me, that's actually why that map seems so remarkable. Is
Yes.
that then you're having greater percentages of those families in states where
That's right.
they have to be really much more hostile and where you have, you know, a greater percentage of
Right.
distress.
That's right. Yeah.
Were they
Yeah.
integrated in that map? I was just wondering, I know.
It's a map. You know, I want you to know I wasn't going to put the map up because I knew this was going to happen. I spent last night for half an hour like researching this map because I knew I was going to get asked all these questions about it.
Yeah, my wife's got a friend from high school who's like on a art commune in Kentucky, and it's like they're all gay men, and but they're all kind of like separate from the surrounding
Right,
community.
right,
Yes.
right. And that exists everywhere in the country, these sort of pockets,
Yeah.
pockets of people, yes. So this is the question that was raised earlier about opposite sex role models. So one of the questions here is, how do same-sex parents pass along gender roles to their children? And are we doing that in traditional ways? And I also raised the question, should we be? Should we be? You know, perhaps that should not seem like the kind of radical question that it is, but it is really a radical question. You know, if you answer the average social worker when they say, how do you plan to raise your son? And you say, well, you know, I intend to have him wearing pink dresses, you will not have a child in your house. There is no question about that. But the expectation is that you will do this, you know, you will work harder than the average straight couple to make sure your kids are learning the proper lessons about gender. And then there's the question of ethics. When laws and policies don't support your family, how do you determine what ethical rules to follow? So the example I gave earlier about the couple that went to the judge knowing that they were breaking up but pretending that they weren't breaking up because they knew that if they told the judge they were breaking up, the judge would not grant a second parent adoption. So there's a lot of complications because the system as it stands just does not usually understand our families. Okay. Talked about some of this earlier. What does it mean to be erotically straight and culturally queer, as many of our children will be? So, you know, when we talk about culture, when we talk about Latino culture, when we talk about Asian culture, when we talk about Jewish culture, you know, queer culture is a culture, or cultures. You know, so your kids grow up with a certain kind of sensibility, a certain kind of sense of humor, or certain kinds of things that are familiar to them. I'll tell you a funny story. My son, when he was about 7, said to me, Mom, I don't think that Josh's parents are lesbians. And I said, no, honey, Josh's mom and dad are not lesbians. Well, what do you call that? What do you call that when a man and a woman love each other? I mean, that's kind of different. You know, so when you think about this sort of, you know, how they're trying to understand their world, I'm blocking out her name, families like ours, Abigail Gardner. Abigail Gardner tells a story. She has a gay dad, and tells a story about them. She was dating in college, that the men she was dating had to kind of pass the test of whether or not they could go to like one of dad's dinner parties and be comfortable in a room with, you know, these gay men and their sense of humor, and they're talking and they're touching each other and they're just being themselves, and whether the men that she was dating would sort of run out of the room screaming. And I think it's a wonderful, you know, story. I mean, she's erotically straight, but there's a cultural piece. You have to be able to fit in with my family.
I have a kind of an answer to that. I think what it means to be erotically straight and culturally queer is to have maybe some of the world's first and original allies.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. And I'm gonna show you that.
Not people who have to unlearn something.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So I also want to share with you the importance of teaching families how to teach their children comfort and pride. And this is one of those pieces that I come across all the time. Is, you know, the kid gets in the car and says, Mom, I don't know, kids at school keep asking me like who Tammy is whenever Tammy picks me up at school. And Mom's answer is, you tell them that's none of their business. That's really not a good answer. That's really not a good answer. And I'm not saying you say, well, that's Mommy's lesbian lover. I'm not saying that's a good answer necessarily either. But you need to find words that fit your community and that the child has an ability, the child is learning how to communicate in school settings that can often be very, very hostile. Okay. All right. So a little bit of a history lesson here that I want to go through about research. So the prevailing social context has been that homosexuality in parents was detrimental to children. If a parent was a known homosexual, there was zero ability for him or her to maintain custody of that child, period, before 1975, 76, and really 1980-ish. So a woman who came out as a lesbian, and most of this, as you'll see, is more about women than men, although we'll talk about that piece in a minute, that for a woman to come out as a lesbian, there was not a court in the land that would grant her custody of that child at a time when women always got custody of their children, men never did, except when the mother was a lesbian. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So public awareness of lesbian moms began in about 1978. So increasing numbers of married heterosexual women, think the women's movement, think feminism, were divorcing men for whatever reasons. They were coming out as lesbians, and they were fighting these battles in court. And what basically happened is a number of researchers took on this challenge of studying what happens to the children of lesbians in order to bring this data back into the court system. So this study started in the mid-70s. The majority of them have been done on lesbian households that were formed by donor insemination. We now have, in the last decade, more research on families formed by adoption and increasing research formed about gay dads who are adopting. And Abby Goldberg's book just came out like this week. I haven't had a chance to even look at it yet. It is all about gay dads and adoption. So we're just starting to get that research out there now. So here are the names for those of you that are researchers and want this information. Golembeck in the UK and Patterson in the US were the folks that did a lot of the research. And Nanette Gartrell's ongoing longitudinal study is available online. So it's, you know, all of her articles are available online. So they're concerned with answering two questions. Do lesbian mothers differ from heterosexual mothers in the quality of their parenting? And can a parent influence the gender development, i.e. masculinity or femininity of their children. That was what they were sort of obsessed with back in the mid-1970s. So what is the impact of having a non-heterosexual parent? What are in the best interests of the children? Because of course, that's the language of the courts. Does it harm the children? Does it make children more likely to be gay or genderqueer themselves? And there is serious interest in studying this from everybody, from the right and from the left, okay? So it's really important to get that the courts cared about this, that researchers cared about it, that Child Protective Services cared about this, adoption agencies cared about this. Okay, and the fear, and I really want you to get this, that the fear is around the development of sex and gender identity. I asked that already. Are children who are reared in LGBT homes more likely to have atypical gender identities? You want to guess on that? Yes? No? Are boys less masculine and girls less feminine? Is there an increase in homosexual identity? Can gay parents make gay kids? I mean, is there something that gay parents are doing that would make their kids gay? Okay. So I have to show you that picture. Those are my son. Oh, you can't really see it. That's so bad. Those are my sons dressed up in these wild costumes, these Power Ranger high heel shoes costumes. I just thought it was a good picture to put up there about properly gendering boys. All right. So 3 decades of research, and these are 2 quotes I have here. The first one from Charlotte Patterson. Evidence to date suggests that home environments provided by gay and lesbian parents support and enable children's psychosocial growth just as those provided by heterosexual parents. And Ellen Perrin says, a growing body of scientific evidence demonstrates that children who grow up with 1 or 2 parents who are gay or lesbian fare as well in emotional, cognitive, social, and sexual functioning as children whose parents are heterosexual. Any thoughts about that? All right, I'm going to keep going here. So some of the studies compared children of single lesbian mothers to children of single heterosexual mothers. Some studies compared lesbian couples to those raised by heterosexual couples. Some studies looked at children across the age spectrum, longitudinally over time. Some looked at only young children, some looked at only adolescents. Some studies looked at only longitudinal over the course of their childhoods, and a few of them have continued on. You know, the exciting thing about Nanette Gartrell's work is the 17-year-old cohort group. She talks to them all online, and so she has a 100% response rate, which, as you well know, in a longitudinal study is amazing. She just sends them, you want to fill out the survey? They're like, sure, and they just kind of respond right back online. So the studies have been geographically diverse through Europe and the US. So not a single study found any adverse effects on children's psychological or emotional development. The sexual orientation of parents does not affect children's social development. The children of lesbians made friends and formed healthy peer relationships. The sexual orientation of parents does not affect their cognitive development. I find that hysterical. Like, I don't know who the hell thought it would, but I'm glad to know it didn't. The sexual orientation of parents does not affect the quality of their relationships, their parenting skills, or their commitment to their children. I don't know if they thought lesbians would just sort of leave the children out for the dogs at some point or not, but apparently they don't. Children of lesbian mothers fell within conventional norms of sex-type behavior. Okay. Children of lesbian mothers showed no difference in gender development, either their gender identity, their gender role, or their sexual orientation. There's no evidence of gender identity confusion or atypical gender, no difference between children in lesbian and heterosexual families for either boys or girls. And if you're interested, these are the 2 longitudinal studies, the Avon longitudinal study done in the UK and the National Lesbian Family Study done in the San Francisco Bay Area. Children of unknown donors were indistinguishable from those with known donors, and the children were comparable to those raised in heterosexual families. So some other findings from these studies. Some studies found that lesbian mothers were less likely than heterosexual parents to use corporal punishment, and the prevalence of physical and sexual abuse in these children were lower. Now, of course, we'll see what they say in 15 or 20 years. They were still the oldest kids in these studies were 17, and we know that lots of people don't reveal information about sexual abuse until they're older. One study showed that although some children had more problematic social interactions, they also had higher self-confidence, maturity, and tolerance. So this is where the headline is in the New York Times. Children of lesbian mothers do better. Okay. Can you hold it? Can you just hold it for 1 second? Some researchers found that most children in lesbian parent families had experienced teasing and name calling, as had children in other families. It's just that this teasing was more specific around you have two mommies versus, you know, your mommy has red hair. So, I mean, it was, you know, it was specific in that way. And I want to say something about the bullying. I really think that the concern that children will be rejected is really a fog screen for the fact that we have to deal with bullying. I mean, if kids in schools are getting bullied, if kids using wheelchairs are getting bullied, if kids who have an accent are getting bullied, it means we have to do work in the school system. It doesn't mean that we have to stop having lesbian parents. I mean, that it's just set up there to kind of fog the whole issue. Okay, other findings. Some studies found that children of lesbian mothers showed a wider range of sex-typed behaviors. So even though the children were not confused, they were not more likely to be gender dysphoric or have cross-gender identities, they did show a wider range of these behaviors, and they felt less constrained by gender roles. I always have this piece when I do this that I want to say, and that's good, you know, so, and that's good. Daughters of lesbian mothers were found to be less traditional in their dress and activities and more likely to have career aspirations that were not confined to stereotypical feminine occupations. Anybody have trouble with that? I don't have trouble with that. Like, I feel really good about that. Sons of lesbian mothers were less aggressive than those raised in heterosexual households. I can live with this. I mean, if that's a difference, like, I'm okay with it.
And how's their dress?
How's their dress? Yes. I don't know how the boys dress. There's also, I don't think I have this in here, there's also research showing that the boys seem to have sex later. They start being sexual a few months or years later than comparison groups of boys. The girls, however, have sex a little younger.
Whether they need to or not.
Whether they need to or not, right. Okay, so one study found that young adults who were raised by lesbian mothers were equally likely to experience feelings of same-sex attraction as their peers. In other words, in a comparison group, both groups had certain levels of